You think you'd last a week locked in a medieval dungeon? Cute. The average stint in one of these charming pits of despair was roughly a month if you were lucky enough to survive that long. Spoiler, most didn't. No Netflix, no Wi-Fi, not even a lousy flashlight app. Just stone walls slick with filth, and the distant drip-drip of your inevitable demise echoing like a soundtrack nobody asked for. Let's talk food. Actually don't, because there was none. Maybe a moldy crust of bread if the jailer felt merciful. Spoiler alert, mercy was rarer than decent plumbing. And even if you did score that crust, it was usually stale enough to double as a weapon. Oh, and water? What water? You'd be lucky if your only hydration came from licking the sweaty floor or catching rain dripping through the ceiling cracks. No nutrition, no vitamins, no survival rations packed by your mommy. It's like expecting to run a marathon on chewing gum and bad decisions. Still chained, still not dead. How's that for endurance training? Then there's the luxury of medieval hygiene. Ever wondered why the Black Death hit hard? Hint dungeons were petri dishes for every conceivable pest, and germ comforts of modern sanitation were laughably absent. Rats, fleas, lice your new roommates throwing raves that no one wanted to attend. You'd swap stories with a plague flea about how, basically, it could be worse. Still breathing, but definitely losing the social graces that 21st century soap brands take for granted. Oh, and the stench. Imagine the worst gym locker room you've ever visited. Multiply it by 1,000, and that's your daily aroma. No ventilation, no cleaning crews, just human misery thick enough to choke on. Here's a historical gem. Henry VIII reportedly had a torture chamber so efficient it was considered an early form of psychological warfare. Translation: if you thought your dad's eye roll was painful, try having your sanity shredded by echoing screams and endless darkness. Welcome to the medieval spa, where you don't relax, you disintegrate. The mind games didn't stop with physical pain. Uncertainty and sensory deprivation were their favorite tricks. Sleep, a luxury. Hope, even rarer. You're thinking, well, I'm tough. I'd hold out. Sure. Like you held out on that salad last week, or ignored an email for 3 days. Newsflash, no one holds out in a dungeon. They just fade away like bad reality television. Your modern-day rough time is called a bad commute. So yeah, stand there and imagine those stone walls closing in the silence, screaming louder than your Spotify playlist, and the existential threat of totally pointless suffering. Ready to RSVP? Nah, didn't think so. Imagine this locked in a cell so moist you're basically marinating, starved for sunlight and dignity, with rats eyeing you as their next Instagram snack. Odds you'd last a week in a medieval dungeon, slimmer than a fasting monk's waistline. Spoiler, medieval torture chamber wasn't a boutique spa package. It was a hostage situation with dirt as the only amenity. You think your office cubicle is bad? At least you get Wi-Fi. Medieval dungeons? Nope. No email, no do not disturb sign, just dripping ceilings playing the world's worst soundtrack on an endless loop. No food, no light, no silence. Just you, the cold stone, and the sweet serenade of your own failing sanity. Fun fact, they sometimes tossed prisoners into oubliettes so tiny they could neither stand nor sit comfortably. You'd think, at least I could nap. But no, medieval designers went full sadist on ergonomics. Think less resting cell, more vertical coffin. Here's a bright idea from history. Some dungeon keepers used to toss prisoners bits of stale bread, sometimes laced with filth, because apparently slow starvation was their version of customer service. That's the kind of hospitality where your only room service involves rats nesting in your ribs, and forget showers or plumbing. Medieval prisons had the charm of a chemical dump. You smelled like a medieval farm animal after a hurricane. Personal hygiene? Off the table, which only made infection a charming bonus. Maggots, festering wounds, and hypothermia were the unofficial VIP perks you didn't order. You really think your anxiety about public transport is bad? At least you're not gasping for air trying to negotiate breathing through toxic fumes while debating death by hypothermia or dehydration. Still chained, still not dead. Somehow that was life's twisted cliffhanger. Many prisoners were left to rot for months. Half the inmates died in a week tops. You're on day 6 wondering if rotting quietly beats the alternative of sheer madness. No window, no door, no exit. Just rock walls closing in on you like a bad Tinder date that never ends. Sound travels in the silence, groans, scurrying rats, the slap of guards' boots. Occasionally a sliver of light or the clink of metal chains. Hope, that left with last week's bread crust. Still cold, still chained, still not dead. So next time your Wi-Fi cuts out and you think about rebooting the router, remember some poor soul got locked in a pitch-black, vermin-ridden hole, slowly becoming a historical footnote while you complain about buffering. No Wi-Fi, no mercy? Congratulations, you just signed up for medieval hell, minus even the ability to tweet about it. Bread. You think you'll survive without carbs? Medieval dungeons disagree. One loaf a week that was your Michelin star meal if you were lucky enough to count bread as food instead of luxury crime. Yep, in some prisons, even possessing a crumb meant you'd be hauled off for a theft, which in medieval law was pretty much a sentence to permanent misery. Congrats, you're the poorest, dumbest glutton in the kingdom. Food wasn't just scarce. It was a concept, an idea whispered in your empty belly while rats nibbled at the wood beneath you. Peasants' bread was more myth than mealmostly sawdust and water shoved together to keep hope from dying too fast. Meanwhile, guards trotted around with their jugs of ale and pork fat like it was Mardi Gras every damn day. You were lucky to get a splash of stale water hold your applause, and if you begged for more, the answer was a collective no, delivered with medieval charm, which means blunt force and threats of the torture rack. Let's talk. Light sunshine was a rumor passed between chains. Vitamin D? Forget it. Your only exposure was when the jailer opened the door long enough to apologize for the day's fresh hell and slam it shut before you could scream. And silence? Ha! Cell walls buzzed with the sounds of other lost souls, crying rats, wrestling, and the occasional forgotten prisoner losing what's left of their mind. No food, no light, no silence. Still chained, still not dead, not yet. If you think modern prison is rough reality check, the average medieval dungeon was basically a toxic stew of filth, despair, and death, all served on a moldy wooden platter. And let's not forget the air, breath of fresh air. Back then meant the occasional gust carrying the perfume of nearby cesspits and rot. You'd fall sick faster than a tweet going viral, then get tossed into a hole to die alone while the guards collected their bribes. Disease spread like gossip, and hygiene was a fantasy scribbled in some monk's diary never meant for your eyes. Fleas, lice, and scurvy were roommates you never signed up for. So yeah, next time you stress over your gluten-free latte, remember, in the medieval dungeon, bread was a luxury crime, starvation, a hobby, and survival a cosmic joke. You wouldn't last a day, maybe not an hour. And if you did, well, congratulations. You'd be medieval legend number 742, glorified skeleton with a do not disturb sign. Enjoy your chains, your personal space measured in millimeters. Welcome to the medieval dungeon, where privacy was a fairy tale and comfort a cruel joke. Imagine a cell barely bigger than a coffin because medieval architects clearly thought claustrophobia was a feature, not a bug. Average floor space? About 2 paces by 2 paces. Squelch into that. Perfect spot to host your yearly family reunion, right? Nope, just you, your rat roommates, and the unmistakable aroma of old death. And don't think you'll get a breath of fresh air. Those dank walls were designed like a sarcophagus, sealing you in pitch-black misery with all the ambiance of a damp sock. No windows, no ventilation, and for fun, Let's add chains metal hugs just tight enough to remind you who's boss. Charles Dickens once referred to the filthy dungeons where men continued to breathe upon the smallest patch of ground. Small patch? You've had bigger living quarters in an economy-class airplane seat, except the planes have snacks and tiny screens. Here, no food, no light, no silence, just the squelch. Ever heard of modern claustrophobia therapy? Medieval jailers didn't care. They considered your discomfort a feature, not a bug. And flush your thoughts of hygiene down the medieval oubliette. There wasn't any. You were expected to share your boiling hatred of humanity with rodents' filth and your own bodily functions. Rats had the run of the place like spoiled toddlers in an all-you-can-eat buffet. They even nibbled at prisoners' toes. Toe nibbling. That's a thing. Shakespeare's Measure for Measure described imprisonment as the loathsome dread of something after death. Try living that, toe nibbling included. Expect no comfort breaks either. Your only toilet was a corner puddle festering underfoot and creating a microbial stew thick enough to choke on. Still chained, still not dead. The horror? Your grandest medieval dream was to not die immediately from infection or despair. And as you slowly hallucinate worshiping any scrap of light or sound, remember these dungeons were considered state-of-the-art punishment, because nothing screams justice like invading every inch of your personal space until it fights back. Even when you thought the torment might ease, your captors made sure mold rats and a constant drip of cold water kept the torture fresh. And don't forget the roar of people above your tormentors' carefree lives, stomping over your misery. Would you last a day? No, you wouldn't. But hey, at least you'd be making history's least comfortable social distancing look fabulous. Because personal space wasn't measured in feet, meters, or hell, even inches. It was measured in millimeters precisely, the space between your sanity and oblivion. Welcome to the party. Don't forget your toe guards. You think you've had bad bathroom breaks? In a medieval dungeon, you didn't just lose your dignity, you lost the concept of privacy altogether. No toilets. Ever. You pissed in a corner or your own chains and hoped the smell didn't kill you first. The Centers for Disease Control would have shut that place down faster than you can say typhoid. But hey, medieval folks thought stink was just part of a good sentence. Imagine rotting in darkness so complete you'd forget what sunlight looks like, unless you count the faint glow of mold spreading like some toxic art project on the walls. They didn't bother with ventilation, no fresh air. Just stale death soup simmering in your cell, a cocktail of sweat decay and whatever else escaped your chains. And water? Sure, if you wanted the luxury of drinking from your own filth puddle or licking condensation off the stone. Thirst was a slow torture, but hey, dehydration was just the universe's way of trimming the prisoner roster. The funniest part? Prisoners were sometimes fed so little that your meals would starve faster than your spirit. A historian once noted that some captives could survive over a year if they got stale bread and water. A year. Meanwhile, you can't even survive 5 hours at a music festival with porta potties in worse shape. Still chained. Still not dead. Still smelling like medieval regret. Beds? Forget about comfy corners or even rags. Stone slabs were the only option harder than your student loan debt, and equally persistent in ruining your back. Add in the bonus feature rats. Not the cute furry kind, but the chew-through, your flesh variety that made ceaseless scratching the medieval version of a monster under your bed. Survivors swore it sounded like nails on a coffin, lied except you were in the coffin. Your nightmares didn't stand a chance. Oh, and let's talk about sanitation ritual. Spoiler alert, there were none. Sometimes you were left to wallow in your own waste for days, weeks, maybe months. That's right, no cleanup crew, no fresh straw, no, hey, let's at least swap out the bloody rags. Just you and your biological apocalypse. So you think your cramped apartment is bad? Try a dungeon where the only light is the distant screams, and your skin becomes a permanent shade of corpse gray. How's that for a home away from home? Welcome to medieval hospitality, where your only guaranteed amenity is someone's terrible hygiene, and a future you won't live long enough to regret. Still holding out for a miracle? Don't worry, they didn't have miracles, then just mold and misery on tap. And maybe a rat or two gnawing at the last shred of hope. Still cold, still chained, still not dead, still wishing you'd just stayed home. If you think a rat bite is just a bad night in a rundown apartment, welcome to the medieval dungeon where rodent bites were basically your daily special. One prison had so many rats they could gut a chained man faster than the guards could say, "Fetch me more wine." Spoiler: no wine, just rats and disease. Rats didn't just nibble, they delivered bubonic plague like medieval Amazon couriers no signature required. Imagine waking up with a missing chunk of flesh and a fever that made your bones feel like wet noodles. But hey, the rats were just the opening act. If the rats missed you or left you too alive, the guards had their own brand of hospitality. Imagine your captors half-starved, probably drunk, or just cruel for a living. They had all the patience of a DMV clerk, but coupled with murder weapons. Their idea of small talk? Dragging you across rough stones or smashing your fingers with a club to keep you lively. Their favorite pastime? Throwing you into a pit of filth and shouting, "Good luck." Spoiler alert, you won't get it. Today's prison guards have pepper spray. Theirs had torture devices that doubled as interior decoration. Lest you forget, a 15th century jailer once bragged, "I brought him back to life in the shape of a corpse." Charming, right? No food, no light, no silence. Your days blend into endless nights, lit only by your hope dying. Fresh air? Ha! More like the unmistakable aroma of mold rot and never again. If you somehow manage to choke down the stale bread, it's probably crawling with maggots because dietary standards were more "do your best" than "please." And just when you start thinking about tapping into that rogue toe for a snack, congratulations, you're officially a prisoner of the worst kombucha fermentation process ever invented: human waste and despair. The smell alone could knock you out, but death was sometimes slower than drowning in your own filth. You think a modern nightmare is getting locked out of your phone? Try being chained so tight you forget if you have limbs, or just twisted darkness. Muscle cramps, bruises, sores that won't heal. It's like someone's constipated your entire nervous system, still chained, still not dead. Medieval horror was less escape room and more endless purgatory, but with medieval plumbing, spoiler, non-existent. So why would you survive? Because you're curious? Because hope fixes everything? Newsflash: hope didn't get anyone out alive, it just made the rats feel hungrier. Next time you whine about missing Wi-Fi, remember, if the rats don't get you, the guards will. And either way, you're definitely not streaming. You think you can handle being chained in a medieval dungeon? Think again. The average prisoner lasted about 3 weeks before either losing their mind, their toes, or their life, whichever came first. And that's not counting the occasional rat buffet or the charming ambiance of damp stone walls festooned with mold and despair. You wouldn't survive the first night, let alone the endless, monotonous hell that is imprisonment in the Middle Ages. Picture this. You're crammed into a hole underground, no daylight, no fresh air, and the company of screaming echoes and squelching something or other that isn't quite human, but also isn't quite reassuring. No food, no water, no hope. And the chains? Oh, those lovely chains that rub your ankles raw while your captors go play let's not care. They didn't even bother with a bed. Just the hard, cold dampness, perfect for developing infections and existential dread. Oh, did I mention silence? You'll get none. Medieval prisons were less peaceful exile and more non-stop scream fest starring rats in a lead role. Noise pollution was medieval-style clanking armor, distant torture sessions, and prisoners losing what's left of their sanity through shrieks and mutters. Soundproofing, budget cut during the last plague. Your mental state isn't improving, it's deteriorating. Welcome to sensory overload featuring smells that modern landfills wouldn't dare imitate. Here's a fun fact to keep you company. The infamous Tower of London had prisoners chained in the basement, where the ventilation was basically just the will to survive. Sir Walter Raleigh spent years chained there, but guess what? He kept writing letters while living like a damp onion on a rock. If you think you're busy, try scribbling love notes while gnawing your own arm for warmth. Add to that the boredom, slow gnawing beast. Days passed indistinguishable from nights thanks to the absence of clocks or sunlight. Your only opponent is your own mind, which quickly becomes a rabid lunatic brainstorming escape plans that always end in more chains or worse. No books, no music, no Wi-Fi. Just you and the echo chamber of your mistakes. Still chained, still not dead, still not mentally prepared to go medieval on your captors because every attempt draws more chains or a splash of cold water. So, if you ever think about surviving this nightmare, remember dungeons weren't designed for survival, just prolonged disappointment. Enjoy your modern Netflix and unlimited takeout because here the only streaming service would be your own tears. You wouldn't last a day in a medieval dungeon and you'd deserve the free trial of misery. Imagine this 70 of prisoners didn't survive their first month underground. Spoiler alert, neither would you. No soft mattress, no Spotify playlists. Just stone walls, sweating damp darkness, while rats starved alongside you because, hey, it's communal dining, 14th century style. Oh, and dental care? The medieval dental plan was hope. Hope your teeth fall out slowly enough you don't scream the guards awake. They believed toothworms caused cavities, and treatment was basically a rusty needle and prayers to Saint Apollonia, patron saint of toothaches. Want to lose a tooth? Great. Just grab a rough string, tie it around the offending brave soul and yank. No Novocaine, here only screams drowned out by dripping water. Modern horror? Your dentist has easy tools, Novocaine, and a listening ear. Medieval dentist? Chalice of wine and an axe-whetting stone. Agree to that root canal and you're signing your own death warrant faster than you can say plague. No food, no light, no silence. Think starvation, but with the ambiance of dripping water and the muffled screams from the guy in the cell next door. Which, yes, you'll hear forever because stone does not absorb sound, it mocks you with it. Still chained, still not dead. Your lungs soak up the stink of human waste because chamber pots are inconvenient guest houses, not sanitation solutions. The phrase air freshener wasn't just unknown, it might as well have been witchcraft. Modern jail food is reported as inedible. Medieval dungeon banquets featured mold rats and the ever-exciting possibility of dysentery. Bon appetit. Sure, justice was served, but so was a side of neglect and disease. Typhus and scurvy were the real executioners, more reliable than any hangman. The guards? They probably forgot you existed until they needed a break or a laugh at your misery. Which begs the question, would you even know how to beg them, or would your tongue rot before you got the chance? And if you tried protesting, expect a beating because prisons doubled as medieval educational centers in pain and silence. You think you're tough, brave? The Iron Maiden wasn't the worst of it. The true torture was knowing no one was coming, no one cared, and the only plan, medieval dental or otherwise, was to outlast the rats. Rat bites were essentially a death sentence, but hey, free ulcers. Your flesh becomes a buffet, your body a countdown clock. And in the end, that's not survival. It's just the longest goodbye you ever didn't want. Sweet dreams, dungeon dweller. You think you hate your office cubicle? Try being tossed into a medieval dungeon where the air smells like ancient regret and disappointment, plus a little human decay. Fresh air? That's a luxury for winners, not peasants. People literally starve down here, but hey, at least they weren't outside where sunlight might have nudged their skin towards something resembling life. You'll spend weeks breathing the same stale, death-spiced atmosphere, oxygen levels lower than your motivation on a Monday. They didn't invent ventilation because air conditioning was just open the door and pray, which, spoiler, wasn't an option when you're shackled to a wall. Here's a fun fact to brighten your mood. The average medieval dungeon was so damp and moldy that prisoners often caught diseases more efficiently than email spreads in an office gossip chain. No antibiotics, no band-aids. The closest thing they had to first aid was a rat chewing on your toe. Could be worse, right? Nope. Rat bites introduced infections that high-key doubled your life's misery. You're probably wondering how you'd survive more than a week without fresh air, decent water, or, hear me out, even a sunny window. You wouldn't. That dank stench was a cocktail of rotting straw body odor and centuries' worth of spilled piscolate eau de despair. No windows, no breeze, only the occasional muffled sob or distant clanking chains. If you tried to shout for help, your voice swallowed by stone walls. The only answer was silence, or worse, echo. Water wasn't fresh naturally. Often it was a trickle from a rotten wooden bucket shared among prisoners, filtered through God knows what. Not exactly the kind of hydration your gym coach preaches. Got a cough? Tough. Coughing kicked up spores of mold and who knows what else. The air was basically a microbial flea market. Contrast this with modern prisons. Sure, it's not a spa, but at least you're not breathing recycled sewer gas and sharing your cell with fungal colonies that scream, "Good luck." No food, no light, no silence. Just you, your chains, and the occasional psychotic rat deciding you're the new chew toy. Of course, medieval dungeon masters didn't see the irony. To them, it was just Tuesday's hospitality. They called it justice. You'd call it a long, slow, hell gone horribly wrong. Still chained, still not dead. Wondering how you last night's internet stream suddenly feels like the ambience of a 5-star resort. Sure, today's prisons have bars, but at least the air's breathable and the water's not trying to kill you. Spoiler alert, the only way you'd survive a medieval dungeon is if you already had a death wish. Now, isn't that a fresh thought? You think you can survive a medieval dungeon? Cute. Odds are you wouldn't last a week before your own body starts staging a grotesque mutiny. Here's the deal. Back then, dungeon wasn't a feature on a dungeon crawler video game map. It was a moist, rat-infested oubliette where human decay went to breathe easy and eventually shrivel up for eternity. No food, no light, no silence. Just you wet stone walls and the charming company of vermin signing up for the all-you-can-eat buffet. Spoiler alert, it's you. Fun fact, they used to chain prisoners together, sometimes cheek to cheekagene optional, because nothing says security like sharing a cell with a dude who's been fermenting toilet water in his boots for a month. Speaking of taste, medieval dungeons had an ambient soundtrack of dripping water, scuttling rats, and the occasional death rattle. Your last playlist got jealous. Good luck getting any sleep through that. Oh, and diseases? They were basically the head chefs. Bubonic plague, scurvy, tuberculosis, holy trinity of why are you still alive? Turns out, without modern penicillin or mashed avocados, your immune system's gonna get its annual faceplant. You ever get a cold? Imagine that, but your nostrils filled with swamp water and your only medicine, a rat bit or a priest mumbling in Latin half-hearted exorcisms. Still chained, still not dead. Why? Because the universe hates you and medieval doctors used leeches to balance your humors. Good luck with that. Spoiler, they didn't cure anything except your dignity. Let's throw some candlelight on this mess. Your doom's not just inevitable, it's ceremoniously slow. At least in modern horror movies, the hero gets cool death music and maybe a witty last line before the monster munches them. You get cold, endless damp, the steady seep of existential dread, and the gut-churning smell of mold and unwashed bodies. And the rats? Those little freeloaders don't just nibble your toes, they gnaw on the idea that someday someone might remember your name. Instead, you become part of the architectural decay, an unremarkable stain on history's grim floor plan. Still want to complain about your Wi-Fi? Spare a thought for the medieval dungeon tourist, because at least your biggest problem isn't turning into a plague-ridden snack in a pitch-black tomb with zero Halloween payoff. Torchlight vibes, disease included, wasn't a tagline, just Tuesday. Still chained. Still not dead, and oh, what a disappointment that turns out to be. Welcome to the slowest game over screen ever. Survival rate for prisoners in medieval dungeons? About 10%. 10%. Your chances aren't great, unless you're willing to pay the toll literally. No coin, no chance. Welcome to the pay-to-play or starve era, where ransom was less a political tool and more the only damn thing keeping your rotting corpse off some rat's dinner plate. Spoiler, you're the rat's dinner plate. Dungeon cuisine, and I use that term loosely, was the global leader in moldy bread and water that graduated from funky to biohazard faster than you can say scurvy. Want a crumb of cheese or a lick of stew? Better have a family who cares enough to cough up coin. Otherwise, say hello to delicious starvation mixed with a side of fleas and existential dread. No food, no light, no hygiene, no hope. Still chained, still not dead. Thriving? Please. Here's a fun fact from the Middle Ages. They used prisoners as spotlight holders during interrogations because, hey, what's suffering without a few blinding lights added to the sensory horror? You get chained in darkness until your eyeballs scream. Then they torch a tiny flame just close enough to remind you the world exists outside that moldy hole. Think modern-day electric bill? You'd kill for that luxury. Literally kill because you're about to die for not paying your metaphorical and sometimes literal tab. And don't bother thinking this was some poor man's purgatory. Nobles paid ransom. Peasants starved. Everyone paid through misery. The real party trick? Surviving without cash was like trying to survive the Hunger Games, but with less glamour and more human waste. No sponsors, no fancy haircut, just slow attrition and the occasional rat bite. Your only allies in this grim game are weeks-old crusts and your fading memory of the sun. Oh, and guard brutality? Bonus round. A few coins might get you a lick of mercy or a warmer spot near the fire pit. No coins? Enjoy the daily beatings and insults because medieval hospitality was funded exclusively by whips and apathy, talking privileges. That was a luxury for the well-heeled or those with rich, guilt-ridden families. Otherwise, silence was your cage's soundtrack, alongside the chorus of dripping water and your own breaking mind. So yeah, if you ever feel broke, just remember, medieval dungeon life rented hope at a premium, and you're broke, starving, and chained in ignorance. Not to worry, though your financial planning skills will have you exactly where you deserve. Still chained. Still not dead. Still spectating your own slow boil. Enjoy that eternal billing cycle. Your cellmate just sneezed. Twice. Congratulations, you're now officially living your worst nightmare, a medieval dungeon. That's right, your survival odds just took a nosedive faster than you can say plague. Spoiler alert, you wouldn't last a week, not when the air smells like a mix of mold, human misery, and something definitely dead. No food, no light, no silence. Your cellmate's every cough is a feeble announcement of impending doom, because guess what? In those charming times, diseases spread faster than gossip in a witch trial. Back then, dungeons were less secure detention and more biohazard zone with human decor. If you think 2024 headaches are bad, try sharing a stone slab with someone whose hygiene routine stopped at never. And space. Ha. You share about 6 square feet with your cellmate who's probably half-starved and twice as angry. You don't get a cot, you get cold, and that cold lingers like a bad breakup. I heard you liked personal space, said no dungeon ever. Still chained, still not dead. Oh, don't forget the rats. Not cute cartoon rodent-sexual vermin doing rat things, scurrying, gnawing, and yes, stealing your last crumbs. Thanks to King Edward I, these disease carriers were VIP guests, sharing your misery because apparently medieval people loved irony almost as much as torture. Flush toilets, luxury, modern-day camping trips have better sanitation. Your cell's entire plumbing system was probably a hole in the floor doors that sound like a fresh start or what? And ventilation? Forget it. It's like sticking your head in a sock that's been worn next to a body not washed since before breakfast. Add a dripping wall, and your cell turns into a swamp you never asked for. That water's pooling, mixing with filth, and whatever that smell was. You try not to think about the vermin nesting in the corners, or the mold sliding down the damp stones. There's no mattress, just a lumpy hunk of straw, the ancient equivalent of a bed you ask not to be remembered. So yes, you wouldn't survive, and maybe that's why history's so stingy with first-hand dungeon horror stories. Because even sturdy souls found the place a hellish purgatory designed to test every fiber of your will. Your cellmate sneezes again. You consider telling them to keep it down, and then realize you're stuck with them forever and eternity smells like death and regret. Welcome home. You've got roughly 3 weeks in a medieval dungeon before you're either dead insane or so hungry you'd eat the rats crawling over your puke. Spoiler, confession isn't a get-out-of-jail-free card, because the only thing medieval inquisitors wanted more than your soul was proof you were guilty. So guess what? You either deny guilt or confess to everything, even that thing you just made up to stop the screaming. Welcome to the confession or death dilemma, or as history calls it, a shitty trick question with no cheat codes. Now here's the killer detail. Medieval dungeons weren't some dark, secluded prison made for quick trials or justice. No, they were dark, dumb, and utterly pointless cesspools. No food, no light, no clean water. Just cold stone walls and the lingering stink of despair. You want a fast death? Stand in the sun. Missing your fancy modern hospital treatments? Good luck. A 13th century doctor's cure was basically leeches crying on your open wounds while monks muttered prayers nobody believed. They called it justice, but really it was just watching peasants get broken faster than your old dial-up internet. Think you can just stay quiet? Nah. Silence was the enemy. Isolation drove prisoners insane. Many hanged themselves, starved themselves, or started talking to the rats, just to have someone to argue with. Still chained, still not dead. By the way, the famous Sigismund of Hungary once boasted that those caught by the Inquisition confessed before the 4th day due to inescapable torture. Translation? You've got less time than a Netflix binge to spill your guts or turn your brain to mush. And here's the best part, in a place where your only options are slow death or fast death. The idea of confession was less about truth and more about performance art. You lied so convincingly you'd get your sentence cut short if you were lucky enough not to be burned alive first. Torture was less a means to an end, and more the medieval version of a sick party game where everyone loses except the torturer. Cheers to pre-modern fairness. Oh, and did I mention the absolute joy of waiting days in total darkness, chains, rusted shut ears ringing from yelling and body bruised beyond recognition? It wasn't just a physical thing. Your mind collapsed first, turning your memories into nightmares that played on loop. Confession wasn't about clearing your name, it was about saving what little sanity you had left before they decided otherwise. So ready to pick confess or die? Doesn't matter. Because in a dungeon designed by people who failed kindergarten cruelty class, neither's really a choice. You're just a guest star in a horrendous show nobody asked for. And spoiler alert, the encore is always the same. You're standing in a dungeon. Congratulations. The fun part? You'll last about as long as a smartphone battery during a group chat from your in-laws, maybe 2 days before the smell alone scrambles your brain. Medieval dungeons didn't just seduce you with darkness. They bathed you in rot urine and mystery diseases. Nobody bothered naming because survival wasn't on the agenda. Hunger was the real torture. a 10th century prisoner once probably joked. Spoiler, he didn't survive to chuckle twice. Remember, these dungeons predate next-day shipping, climate control, and modern plumbing. So when you think you're having a rough Monday, imagine being tossed into a literal rat hotel where the official guest list excludes food but includes fleas, damp walls, and the occasional guilty whisper from guards who definitely hate their jobs. You might starve, they say with fondness, before dragging you off for a game of how long until we forget you exist. Spoiler alert, not long. Oh, and the amenities? Ever heard of the Iron Maiden? Surprise, it's cruelty masquerading as cozy. The same contraption probably inspired every horror prop that tried but failed to look authentic. You think getting a ticket for a delayed flight is bad? That's like luxury resort compared to being stretched on a rack designed to dislocate every single joint because your crime was wait for it, questionable loyalty, or maybe wearing the wrong color socks. No Wi-Fi, no warmth, no mercy, still chained, still not dead. Here's a nugget to chew on. The famously nasty Scavenger's Daughter was a torture rack that compressed prisoners until they puked blood, a charming spa treatment by medieval standards. Another favorite, water torture. No, not drowning you outright, but the slow drip, drip, drip of water on your forehead until your sanity filed for an emergency exit. And don't get me started on the rack's less popular cousin, the Judas Chira steel throne with spikes where comfort goes to die. Today, the worst thing crushing your soul is a bad boss or a clogged inbox. Is that progress? Sure, if you ignore the guy with the torch lurking in the corner of history. Still, medieval torture wasn't just about breaking bones or spilling guts. It was theater performance art for the power-hungry, sending a message louder than any tweet storm. The cages outside city walls, public shows like brutal street theater, where the audience didn't clap but begged the executioner to wrap it up. You think your Zoom call was rough? At least it doesn't include rats the size of chihuahuas nibbling your toes. Cold. Alone. Forgotten. So yeah, you wouldn't survive a medieval dungeon. You'd be lucky if you made it through a week without becoming a cautionary Pinterest board for future horrors. But hey, cheers to your high-tech anxiety and ergonomic chair. Meanwhile, those dungeon walls are still echoing the phrase, "Just wait, it gets worse." 7 months. That's how long the average prisoner waited in a medieval dungeon before the courts bothered to decide if they were guilty or just unlucky. 7 months, sitting in the dark, no bail, no phone call, just you rats, and the sweet company of your own festering doubt. Welcome to due process. It means wait your turn to suffer. No expedited trial, no speedy verdict, just clock watching and decay. You think modern jail sucks? At least you get a cot and 3 meals a day, even if they're sad microwave nuggets. Back then, moisture dripped from stone walls, seeping into your clothes, glued to skin. No food, no light, no silence. Think of a subway ride that never ends, but with gnawing hunger, screaming mobs outside, and the faint echo of your own sanity breaking. Want a bathroom? Good luck. They called it a garderobe. It was a hole barely separated from your cell, where waste piled up like an unholy monument to human neglect. Flies thrived. The stench was a permanent roommate, smothering hope beneath layers of despair. Here's the cruel joke: the judges themselves might be just as hopeless. Medieval justice was about as reliable as a drunk on a horse, random, brutal, and mercilessly slow. When Henry II famously lamented that damnable bastard God, he might have been chatting about his courtiers, but you trapped below could have sworn it was the system itself conspiring to keep you waiting while the dungeon rotted around your knees. Trials were a formality, sometimes nothing more than charades held by nobodies whose main skill was dithering. Evidence? Forget it. Witnesses? Often bribed or terrified. Verdicts hung on whims or royal mood swings. Justice wasn't blinded, it was blindfolded, drunk, and hiding behind a tapestry. Let's not forget the average sentence wasn't necessarily meant to kill you outright. No, that would be too efficient. Medieval prisoners weren't executed immediately because the crown preferred slow bleeding starvation exposure to spare. Torture wasn't just about extracting confessions. It was entertainment, delay, and control rolled into one miserable package. Each scrape of the rack, each whispered threat, was scaffolding for a system built on intimidation and endless limbo. Waiting was its own punishment. Dragging out agony was the point. Sometimes inmates were left so long they'd beg for death just to escape the waiting. Still chained, still not dead, you've become a prisoner of patience, a hostage of due process. The cruelest ceremony in human history. So next time you whine about waiting in line, remember in the dungeon, your turn to suffer isn't a courtesy, it's a curse dressed up in legalese. Enjoy the wait. It's the longest sentence you'll never get out of. You think pulling an all-nighter is rough? Try being left in a medieval dungeon where sleep deprivation wasn't bad luck. It was a lifestyle. The average torture chamber? Zero comfort, endless screams, and a bed made of hopes and broken bones. Newsflash, the human body doesn't just struggle without sleep, it outright mutinies. Welcome to a world where darkness is eternal. Silence is a cruel joke, and the only clock is the drip of your own despair. No food, no light, no silence, no concept of time, because who needs sanity when you can start hallucinating rats dancing the jig on your ribs? You're not sleep-deprived. You're sleep-dead. The 14th century chronicler Jean Froissart complained that prisoners were kept waking terrified and cold. Really? Cold? That's the polite historical footnote for, hey, let's throw you in a stone box so damp your lungs want a refund. Still chained. Still not dead. Your modern insomnia meds? You'd trade a lifetime supply for a crust of moldy bread here. And speaking of bread, medieval dungeons had food security policies that make airplane peanuts look Michelin-starred. Rats got better meals than you. Spoiler, you're both snack and appetizer in this bio-experiment. The bread you might get, hard as ship planks crust, covered with mysterious spots that won't win any health awards. Water, a puddle that tastes like old death and regret. Sound comfy? You haven't even met the bonus psychological torture complete sensory deprivation. Imagine a week without your phone, your Netflix, your Spotify playlist telling you your life is normal. Nothing but your thoughts, which quickly become worse company than the guards who forgot to feed you. Sleep deprivation diminishes judgment and promotes hallucinations, science says. Thanks science for stating the obvious. Because in the Middle Ages, that disoriented gibbering mess was exactly why you never made it out. They didn't need fancy locks or magic traps. Your own brain was the executioner. You'd lose your mind long before the executioner found you. Eyes bleeding from dry sockets, shaking from cold half. The prisoners died within a week. You're on day 6. And if you think modern sleep studies are brutal, congratulations, you just glorified that torture by comparison. So next time you Netflix binge at 3 a.m., remember, medieval dungeon chic isn't about struggling through a season finale. It's about suffering in a windowless pit where the only thing slower than time is your mindset slipping into madness. Still awake? Good, because the real horror is you were never meant to survive a night, let alone an eternity. You think that eerie moan drifting down the stone corridor is the wind? Cute. That's someone's last breath caught in a rat's nest of mold and misery. Medieval dungeons didn't just lock you away, they auditioned you for the world's worst horror show. Spoiler alert, you didn't survive the premiere. No food, no light, no silence. Just hunger gnawing through your guts like a pack of angry rats who absolutely hate the concept of personal space. You'd imagine maybe they tossed you a crust of bread or a bucket of water, right? Wrong. The daily ration was usually whatever scraps the guards didn't want, occasionally mixed with disease. Your diet would make a modern college dorm meal look like a Michelin star banquet. Ever wonder what it's like to eat bread so stale it doubles as a medieval weapon? Or sip water that tastes like it just swam through a plague? Welcome to the banquet. And speaking of modern conveniences, ever hear of garlic bread, Netflix, or even sunlight? Medieval dungeon menu, none of those. Ever feel your eyelids start to melt because you haven't seen daylight in a month? Congrats, you're adjusting perfectly. Vitamin D deficiency is the starter kit. And that wind again, that eerie wail. Spoiler, not the wind. That's the acoustic signature of dozens of maggot-infested, bone-cracked despair, marinated crying out to thin stone walls that could only pretend to keep out the outside world. Oh sure, the seals and locks kept you physically inside, but the smell alone could purge a body of hope faster than any guard's whip. Rotting straw underfoot, the constant drip of urine from broken pipes, and the chatter of rats, busy feasting on things you'd rather never identify. This was your daily soundtrack. Still chained, still not dead. That's not resilience. It's pure, unadulterated stubbornness, meeting an industrial-strength death trap. Fun fact, the Tower of London's torture chamber once displayed a victim's head on a pike, with a note quoting, "If this is death, please let it come quickly." A medieval Yelp review, if you will, 1 star, would not recommend. So you're buried alive in filth you wouldn't let a raccoon touch, with nothing but echoes and regret. How's that for medieval air conditioning? The only breeze is the cold seep from damp stone and your own breath thick with stale terror. They say history is written by the survivors. Guess those screaming shadows never got the memo. Keep listening to that wind, or don't. It's just the dungeon reminding you you're not alone, but the screams don't get any quieter. You think your office job is tough? Try surviving a medieval dungeon for a week. Spoiler, they didn't have health codes back then, or any codes that didn't involve rats eating your eyeballs. The average prisoner lasted maybe a month, if luck smiled, and the guards got bored before the mold did. The fetid stench of human misery was considered a natural fragrance. According to one cheerful historian, yea, imagine eau de rot mixed with despair bottled for your pleasure. Fresh air, that was the stuff of fairy tales, along with sunlight and breathable water. No food, no light, no silence. Just you, your chains, and the intimate company of vermin who probably judged your life choices better than you ever did. Every creak echoed like a death knell. Every drip was a reminder that even your cell was leaking despair. And if you thought modern prisons were bad, here's a medieval nugget, the oubliette, a pit that was basically the original "you're definitely not coming back" experience. Drop in, shut the hatch, and enjoy decorations like cold stone walls smeared with centuries of forgotten tears. No entertainment, no hope, no mercy. You want a window? Maybe a rat will nudge it open for you. Didn't bring a book? Neither did the dungeon keepers, because who reads when you're busy counting your last breaths? Now about the punishments. Torture was an art form perfected out of sheer boredom and a love of inefficiency. Want to see your fingers again? Hope you weren't the unlucky recipient of the rack, the medieval Stretch Armstrong, with a whopping record of permanent disfiguration. And don't forget the Iron Maiden. Yes, that cozy coffin dotted with spikes was less historical fact and more medieval urban myth, but impressive enough to strike fear into the hearts of poorly served tourists. Your ancestors didn't just suffer. They were the first experiment in human durability tests, funded by pure sadism. The breaking wheel, a medieval spin class, but with bones snapping instead of calories burning. And thumb screws, like a manicure from hell. You think these horrors were reserved for criminals? Nope. Dissent, bad jokes, or just unfortunate birthplaces meant you got an all-access pass to hell's waiting room. Still chained, still not dead, probably begging rats for mercy. The line between prisoner and torture prop was thin, and guard humor was about as warm as the dungeon stew, which wasn't stew at all. So next time you complain about your Wi-Fi, remember in medieval dungeons, the only buffering you got was the sound of your own nightmares loading. Welcome to Punishment for Fun and Profit, the world's original subscription service. Nobody asked for where the monthly fee was your sanity. And unlike any modern contract, there was never an opt-out. Welcome to your medieval dungeon vacation. Spoiler, you're not leaving. You're not figuring out the riddle, picking the lock, or charming a kindly guard. That's a fantasy sold by bad movies. You're locked in a stone coffin with zero useful items except maybe a spoon if you're lucky. Because nothing says escape plan like a vaguely shapeable piece of cutlery. Meanwhile, your eternal optimism is the only thing sharper than the rats nibbling your toes. Medieval dungeons didn't care about your hopes, dreams, or hygiene. Think you're tough? Good. Turns out the average prisoner stayed there for months. Months. You want context? Netflix binges are faster. No food, no light, no silence. Spoiler, the fresh air was actually the exhale of decades. Old decay. The famous British Tower of London was once a literal cesspit, and mates dunked in waste more aggressively than any modern water park ride. Still chained, still not dead. Now you might think, I'll dig my way out with sheer willpower. Sweet summer child, the stone walls are 3 feet thick because they designed prisons to contain people smarter than you. And speaking of smarts, there was the matter of rats, and by rats I mean vermin the size of small dogs. Rats that ate you alive while your spoon sat uselessly in your fist. At least it's shiny. Historically, one prisoner recorded his existence by scratching notes into the wall with a nail probably stolen from the coffin next door. How's that for dungeon chic? Meanwhile, your eternal optimism, waiting for rescue, sounds delightful. But newsflash, like a Netflix reboot, nobody asked for help never comes. Medieval prison was the punishment and the purgatory. Unlike modern prisons that let you binge shows and call your lawyer, your existential dread here was the only channel. Spoilers, it didn't end well for anyone who found hope in those dark, damp cell bars. You're locked in a slow game of decay against your own body, time your silent executioner, and despair your only accomplice. By all means, bring a spoon and eternal optimism. It's the perfect combo if you want to star in a medieval tragedy nobody remembers, except to say, wow, they really screwed you. But don't expect a sequel. The dungeon doesn't do happy endings. Still cold, still chained, still not dead. You'd last about as long as a wet matchstick in a medieval dungeon, roughly 3 seconds before your will to live got auctioned off alongside your rights. No light, no food, no human decency. Just cold stone and the constant drip, drip, drip of despair. Imagine Instagram blackout levels of darkness, except it's been weeks and the only notification is rats nibbling on your toes. Seriously hope you like the flavor of mold, because you're marinating in it. Walls slimy with old sweat and blood, the floor a swamp of refuse and regrets. Not exactly your dream Airbnb. And here's a treat. Medieval dungeons weren't even designed to outright kill you. They just wanted you to choke on your own misery. King Edward I allegedly boasted about forgetting prisoners until they starved or screamed themselves into shock. Charming guy. It's like being ghosted by death itself, still chained, still alive, still not dead. Your screams, music to the noble's ears, your suffering, a weekend pastime. So much for the Dark Ages being about chivalry. No heroic rescue squads, no dramatic sword fights, just silence, ruin, and the occasional death groan muffled by stone walls thicker than your patience. Do you enjoy breathing? Tad luxuriously, huh? Well, you're stuck breathing stale air pumped through holes hardly bigger than a fist. Disease was the real executioner. Not that anyone bothered about hygiene, since soap was a myth, and the Black Plague was the closest thing to customer service. It's like locking yourself in a prison cell with your worst cologne on and asking for a friend, except the friend is dysentery. Mysterious fevers and rotting teeth join the party, turning your body into a walking biohazard. Still sane? Congratulations. That's the real miracle. And while you're rotting in that joyous pit, the world above pretends you didn't exist. No trial, no justice, just a brick canvas for cruelty that would RSVP to your funeral with a smile. Meanwhile, the king's court is debating hats and the price of wine. You'd get better treatment from a DMV line. Remember when Netflix said buffering was torture? Child's play. Try buffering in total darkness with zero snacks, and your only entertainment is the mental slow cook of insanity. Days blur into nights, nights into decades, except not really, because time is your cruelest warden. Welcome to the original escape room, where no hint, no key, and certainly no YouTube tutorial could save you. Still chained, still not dead, and the world's oldest reality show starring your slow, pathetic unraveling goes on without you. Spoiler alert, no one wins. No roses, no cash prize, just the cold comfort that the guards will eventually forget you too. And if you think you're tough, great, you're not. You're dinner for rats. Bon appetit. Mildew is a food group now. Surprise! In a medieval dungeon, the only thing fresher than the smell of despair was the fungus festering on your last scrap of moldy bread. Spoiler alert, you wouldn't last a week unless you moonlit as a statistic in some torturer's sadistic Yelp review. No clean water, no ventilation, no hope. Your diet consists of whatever grows in that ceaselessly damp air, usually some charming cocktail of rot and mildew proudly advertised as nutritious. Bonus points if it's green, fuzzy, or slimy enough to make your stomach file a formal complaint. Oh, and if you thought prison food was bad now, the average medieval dungeon meal was a wet sock of grime and despair wrapped in frostbite. The cruel irony. Some dungeons doubled as insect farms. Doctors of the Dark Ages somehow believed crawling bugs helped digestion, which is hilarious if you ignore that you were also trying not to die from the infection they'd bring. A 14th century English jail report proudly notes inmates subsist on bread so moldy it's practically a new species. Gourmet, right? Don't forget the bonus protein from maggots squirming in your porridges. The local quacks would say a little wriggly surprise keeps your immune system guessing. No light, no food, no silence. Only the umpteenth chorus of rats scuttling over your face, congratulating you on your new roommates, disease, despair, and death's extended stay. If your shiny smartphone battery drains at 20 in a couple of hours, imagine living in a damp hole with zero battery, no Wi-Fi, and the faint hope that your bones don't snap in the cold. You'd literally be an app with no updates, struggling to install survival patches, while the medieval mothership laughs in binary. You hear medieval dungeon and think grim but fair, like some twisted Airbnb for the perpetually unlucky. Spoiler, no minibar, no fluffy towels, just mildew, 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 because the only thing worse than starvation is starvation flavored with a fungus that's probably plotting the overthrow of your immune system. Still chained, still not dead, but probably hallucinating that mildew is a Michelin-starred snack, maybe even offering you a moldy canapé on a silver platter carved out of your own shattered hope. One last thing, the plague was around the corner, and guess what? Dungeons were petri dishes for it. So congratulations, you get the food and the disease combo. Bon appetit, that taste you recognize? That's the flavor of medieval hospitality. The real catch? Your immune system's too busy fighting the Black Death's crashing party to even notice the mildew's coup. So next time you grumble about bad takeout, remember, at least it wasn't served by rats, parasites, and the ghosts of failed hygiene. Hope. The real contraband in any medieval dungeon. Because you think you're tough? Ha! Those stone walls weren't just cold, they were verdicts. Sure, you might last a week without fresh air, food, or decent sanitation, but counting on hope? That was the death sentence's sidekick. Ironically, the poet Dante once described these places as the eternal echo of despair. Poetic, yes. Functional? More like a blueprint for human misery. Imagine staring at a slime-coated wall where light visits so rarely it's mistaken for folklore. No sunlight, no vitamin D. No vitamin D, brittle bones, weak muscles, you hobbling around like a medieval zombie extra in a low-budget horror flick. Rats? They weren't just pets. They were agile, little assholes, enjoying the peppered buffet that was you. Add that to the fact that medieval hygiene ranked somewhere between forgotten myth and legendary tragedy. Nothing moistened those dungeons except your own fear sand, the occasional dripping water that tasted like rusty despair. And food? Oh, the nutritious bread and water rations they bragged about were basically medieval junk food before junk food was trendy. You'd be lucky to get anything that didn't come with a prize side of dysentery. No food, no light, no silence. Just eternal waiting, and let's not forget the surprise bonus, a plausible death from infection, because the idea of sterilization was as imaginary as your chances of parole. Medieval dungeons were the original escape rooms, except the game was rigged and the exit was a pit of despair. Yet people romanticize this hellhole nights, standing tall souls, unbroken hope alive. Seriously? If by hope you mean a slow spiral into madness, while chained next to your new rodent roommates, then sure, hope was alive and kicking. But it wasn't allowed. Hope was the real criminal's mug, defiant, dangerous. Because here's the kicker, hope's not just illegal, it's obsolete. It got the axe with the invention of cell. The modern prison might be dull, but at least you get a mattress. Here, hope's confiscated quicker than your last meal, leaving you with a belly full of anxiety and a future as bright as a blackout. Still chained, still not dead, still no hope. Welcome to your new home. And let's talk noise, because silence would have been a mercy. Instead, you had the symphony of suffering, the drip-drip of that rusty faucet, the scratching of rat claws on stone, the moans of ghosts who'd given up long before you arrived. Sleep was a stranger who checked in rarely and left faster. The air was thick with the stench of rot and regret, making each breath a punishment. Hope didn't just vanish. It was strangled and stuffed into a corner where it choked on the horror show that daily life became. You think you can smile through that? Sure. Keep telling yourself that while the darkness gnaws at your sanity. You think you're having a bad day? Welcome to the medieval dungeon where justice means money talks, your spine cries. Bribery was the password to survival, got no gold? Congratulations, rot in a pit with rats who pay better rent. Lords weren't exactly handing out blindfolds and fair trials. Nope, your fate hinged on whether your relatives could grease the right palm or how many hens you could sneak under the cell door. Here's a fun fact. A knight's ransom could be thousands of gold coins, but a peasant's fine was likely a sack of turnips or a public flogging. Justice was a perk for the rich while the rest of you got to experience the VIP suite of medieval incarceration, darkness so dense you'd swear you swallowed a black hole, air so rancid it could knock out a horse, and water so foul it doubled as your enemy and your lifeline. No food, no light, no silence, no hope, and forget appealing to a higher court. The law was less a system and more an exclusive club membership bought with coin or connections. Know a lord's cousin's cousin? Maybe, you'd see a sliver of mercy. Otherwise, buckle up for the investigation, a shambolic affair where witnesses were bought, confessions beaten out, and verdicts auctioned off like weak old fish. The local bailiff, half drunk, half extortionist, and all about lining his pockets first. Think modern prison systems are bad? At least they have beds and hot showers. Medieval dungeons? Imagine a basement in a Victorian horror flick, but smellier and with fewer plot twists. You'd last as well as a smartphone dropped in a vat of battery acid. Spoiler, the batteries die faster. And don't fool yourself into thinking the law was slow but certain. It was slow, expensive, and up for auction every Tuesday. Like a sick game show titled How Many Bribes Until You're Free. There were no transcripts, no lawyers, no jury of your peers. Just the cold stare of a judge paid off by your enemy, and the muffled cries echoing down stone corridors where mercy was rarer than daylight. Still chained. Still not dead. Still waiting for justice. Sponsored by bribery and blessed by the local lord's hungover scowl. You see, medieval law wasn't founded on truth or fairness. It was a jackpot for those who could pay and a coffin for those who couldn't. So next time you complain about long lines or bureaucracy, remember at least no one's selling your freedom for a sack of chickens, or else. Family visits. You think prison conjures bad vibes? Try medieval dungeons where your family drops by clinking coins like it's a tip jar, because no one's bribing the guard, they're paying your ransom. Bring money, leave dignity. That's the unwritten rule, and nope, you're not getting either back intact. Imagine this. Your cousin trudges down a fetid hallway to toss a crust of bread and a filthy rag at your feet. No hugs, no "how you holding up?" Just a grimace and a silent prayer that you don't make the place smell worse. Your family doesn't visit for your sake. They come because walls don't talk, but coins do. No food, no visits without cash, no respect. Still chained, still not dead. You know those modern escape rooms people brag about? Nowhere near this. At least in escape rooms, you get a clue or a hint. In medieval dungeons? Good luck figuring out which rat's carrying your only friend out of the sludge. Medieval philosopher Michel de Montaigne once said, "It is a place where a man can no longer live, but is not dead yet." Yeah, thanks, boss. No wonder throwing coins at dungeon guards was less a bribe and more a desperate life raft. Your family showing up doesn't mean a rescue party. It means your torment just got outsourced. Plenty of people romanticize knights and kings, forget the chains and screaming. Guess what? Your family visits are just a medieval scam-based support group. They come bearing coins because hope without cash is just whistling in the dark. Cold, damp darkness that makes your shadow disappear. Doesn't care about blood ties. No screams from you escape to the outside world. Only the chinking of coins and the maddening quiet of, "You're not coming back." Look closer and you'll see the tragic economy of this neglect. A few silver pennies tossed to the guard, so your cousin can smuggle in a scrap of moldy bread that's been passed mouth to mouth half a dozen times. That gift might as well be a curse-crumbled, barely edible and carrying the breath of decay. Your family's visit isn't a balm. It's a reminder that love needs currency and you're bankrupt. So here you are, caged, fetid, forgotten. Your family jingles change in the gloom, bargaining for your soul piece by piece. Still chained, still not dead, still waiting for a visitor who won't leave you worse off than before. Bring money, leave dignity. Welcome to family time in the medieval dungeon, where love is a transaction and mercy is just another word for too late. You think your office cubicle smells bad? Try a medieval dungeon where personal hygiene was optional but disease was mandatory. It's not like you'd starve to death here, you'd rot first. Imagine a place where the only bath you get is the occasional drip of your own sweat mixing with rat urine in the corner. The Black Death wouldn't just visit, it would live here rent-free and bring all its friends. No running water, no soap, no common sense. The air is thick with the stench of human waste, sweat, and hopelessness. Historians estimate medieval prisoners averaged 3 feet of feces stacked beneath them before they were dragged out to die, which you'd think would be a natural deterrent. Nope, still chained, still not dead. Meanwhile, fresh air was some myth like democracy or affordable health care. Forget sunlight. If you were lucky, a crack under the door let in a shard of gray nothingness. Here's a gem. Geoffrey Chaucer, who lived in the 14th century, actually wrote in the Canterbury Tales that cleanness is next to godliness. Right before medieval clergy were diagnosed with scabies, and everyone was prolifically covered in lice. Your modern flu season feels like a spa day compared to the plague cocktail brewing beneath your prison tunic. Those cute little medieval bugs were the uninvited roommates from hell, turning every scratch into a necrotic party. Add fleas, bed bugs, and a dash of tuberculosis for flavor, and you've got yourself a medieval health plan you didn't ask for. You want light? Ha! One flickering candle if you're lucky, so you can stare at the rat chewing on your ankle and wonder which of you will starve first. Compared to that, the inside of an average Lowe's warehouse is a 5-star resort. No food, no light, no silence. Just 24/7 sensory assault orchestrated by poor sanitation and eternal neglect. No windows. Just stone walls that soak up every scream like a sponge. And hygiene wasn't just neglected. It was treated like a luxury for whimsies and nobles with running water and bad decisions. For you, scrubbing was a fantasy. Bathhouse, too expensive. Clean clothes, that's cute. They thought washing too often would make you sick, which is basically medieval science at its finest. Fear dirt like it's a witch and let it kill you slower. So instead of soap, you got superstition. Instead of towels, you got rags last seen on a battlefield. The whole system was a slow-motion biohazard that humanity just grudgingly tolerated. So yeah, if you ever dreamed about the romantic allure of medieval imprisonments, spoiler alert, it's a biological death sentence, dressed up as justice. Survival? You're not losing that fight. Not today, not ever. It's a place where the only certainty isn't guilt or innocence, but that you'll become part of the stinking, crawling ecosystem of despair. And trust me, it's hell on your immune system. Mold and weevils. That's your daily special in a medieval dungeon. Forget gourmet, you're dining on fungus so toxic it could kill a horse, and weevil-stiny beetle jerks that feast on your measly breadcrumbs. You think you can tough it out? Statistically, more prisoners died of starvation or disease than from swords or torture devices. Congratulations, your killer is invisible and slimy. Ever wonder why those old castles smell like a wet rat fart? It's because dungeons were basically underground compost, binge-humid dark festering. Fresh air was a luxury reserved for the castles. Lord, not you stuck in a stone oubliette with drainage so bad your waist soaked your feet like a medieval spa treatment. Mold took over your skin like clingy relatives nobody invited. Doesn't matter if you fought in battle, you'll suffocate on mildew faster than you can say habeas corpus. And speaking of crumbs, weevils weren't just annoying. These tiny insects were your involuntary dining companions, snacking on your crumb ration, crawling over your hand as you tried to swallow past the gag reflex. Imagine a rat infestation with wings and a taste for your spit. Think your gluten-free diet protects you? Nope. Here, everyone's main ingredient is despair, seasoned liberally with personal hygiene you forgot existed. Those weevils didn't just eat your food, they spread diseases, hitch rides on your body, turned your meager crumbs into airborne nightmares. They made sure every bite was a gamble with infection. The chronic lack of light meant circadian rhythms went out the window. Days merged into fetid nights. You'd lose track of time and sanity staring at the same moldy patches, while the weevils auditioned for their own reality show on your gaunt frame. No food, no light, no silence. Just you and your new pest army. No windows, no clocks, no reason to hope. Just cold stone walls whispering, "You'll never leave." Your skin crawls literally and figuratively, the damp clinging to you like a second skin. The chill drilling into your bones long after your heart stops caring. Here's a kicker: medieval jailers bragged that dungeons were effective because the walls themselves were the guardians. Translation? Forget guards, those stones were already doing a better job killing you. You weren't just rotting in a cell, you were marinating in biological warfare. Every breath, every inch of your body was a battlefield for mold spores, bacteria, and winged pests. The air was thick with the stench of decay, your own, and the 100 souls who didn't make it before you. So next time you complain about your office cubicle, Think about the fact that people lived and died in these biochemical weapons of ruin, still chained, still not dead, moldy breath and all. Welcome to the secret menu, a feast for the damned served cold and crawling. Bon appétit. Guards in medieval dungeons? Imagine handing a bored toddler a switchblade and telling them to keep the peace. You think the biggest threat is some brutish knight with a business casual grudge? Nah, it's the guard who's been staring at the same damp stone wall for weeks, jealous of your dirt, planning their next sadistic hobby. According to records, some dungeon guards were paid less than a tenth of a modern minimum wage. Guess where that money went? Exactly, into the guard's monthly quota of creative violence. No paycheck, no problem. Beat someone senseless. Keeps morale high. They weren't watching you because they cared. They were bored, armed boredom with a dash of power trip. Boredom breeds cruelty like bread breeds mold. And these guys? They had no Netflix, no snacks, not even a decent scratchy playlist. Just you sitting there blubbering or wide-eyed, your pain background noise to stave off their yawns. One chronicler sneered that guards would joke how to use the rack after work. Sounds like after-hours fun. Torture fanatic club, just a small-town book club with more chain rattling. Some guards apparently kept tally sheets of their favorite torments like twisted bingo cards, except the prize was your screams. Think you'd last? Picture this: a modern cop with the temperament of a poorly tempered Facebook commenter, a job requiring patience and kindness, suddenly given medieval dungeon duties with zero accountability. Yeah, these guards weren't coaches or counselors. They were angry toddlers with lethal tools and a license to punish any twitch or whimper. Your crime? Breathing too loud, asking for water, locking eyes for too long. Luck was you would die before your guard got bored enough to invent a new punishment. Some guards reportedly took up impromptu torture challenges to pass time loser cleans the rat traps. Spoiler, no one volunteered. Still chained, still not dead. Maybe you think time dulls the edge of their violence? Nope, it sharpens it. The boredom doesn't mellow the cruelty, it ferments it into obsession. The guard's motto, bored now, violent later. The only entertainment? Watching you unravel piece by miserable piece. Because in medieval dungeons, the guards didn't protect the piece, they manufactured chaos on the clock, like some twisted IKEA project with no instructions and way too many parts. Good luck explaining that to your ribs when they start cracking. And don't kid yourself that guards shared your misery. Some took pride in their brutal creativity, swapping tips like mad scientists on the darkest episode of MasterChef Torture Edition. One guard was rumored to fashion new tools out of broken chains and rusted nails like a DIY influencer for pain. So yeah, guards were the original bad bosses, underpaid, overarmed, and zero HR. Welcome to the real medieval nightmare, not the cell, not the darkness. The bored guard behind the door, eager to turn hell into a hobby. You think your last meeting was rough? Welcome to medieval interrogations where conversation meant banging your knees against rock until they cracked, or the charming option of watching your toenails evacuate themselves. Torture was literally the business lunch of kings. Thomas More once said, "If you cannot be good, be careful," which is medieval. Speak for shut up or we'll unbone you. Try that philosophy in HR today and see how far it gets. You. Spoiler, nowhere, unless you like awkward stares. No light, no food, no silence. Just your echoing screams bouncing off walls wetter than your sense of hope. Interrogation was less friendly chat and more break all that's human in you. Meanwhile, they called this a civilized society. Funny how chopping limbs off beats sitting through a Zoom call any day. You think you're stressed now? At least your boss doesn't threaten to dunk you in a pit filled with bugs the size of your desktop mouse. And just to remind you, the average medieval dungeon had zero plumbing. You don't need a science degree to figure out that smell was the least of your worries. If that doesn't terrify you, consider the tools of the trade. The rack stretched you like cheap pizza dough. The thumbscrew crushed your fingers as gently as your optimism. And the waterboarding? Imagine drowning slowly, but without the courtesy to let you actually die quickly. This was interrogation, but really it was just state-sponsored performance art starring Pay No Encore. Notably, confession wasn't just desired, it was mandatory. Your captors didn't want the inconvenient truth. They craved a juicy story, preferably with neighbors accusing neighbors in a blood feud that made Game of Thrones look like a bake sale. Oh, you want to confess? Great, because confessing was the entire point. Torturers weren't subtle. They didn't want the truth, they wanted a good story. Your lies, forced or not, became treaties, crimes, and excuses for neighborly blood feuds. Talk about fair trials where the punishment invented the motive, like a badly scripted reality show. You think your lawyer's tough? Medieval lawyers were just the voicemails you never called back, only with sharper knives. Still chained, still not dead. Congratulations on your inspiring stamina. So next time you feel cornered in an awkward conversation, just remember, at least you're not sitting in a damp stone tomb debating whether the cold will finish you before your interrogator's patience. Conversation, my ass. It was medieval performance art in human breakdown. And in the end, they called it justice, but it looked an awful lot like déjà vu for the bug collection. Don't worry, at least you get coffee breaks. You'll rot in that dungeon cell longer than a Twinkie's shelf life, and nobody's coming to check if you're still breathing. The average prisoner in a medieval oubliette might well have lived less than a week. Your only nourishment? Dripping mold, may be the occasional rat you fail to catch, because, surprise, you're not a ninja. Scientists today say it'd be like surviving 6 months without sunlight and 3 days without water. Good luck with that while you're chained to a wall with the ambiance of damp stone and despair. Here's a kicker: the word oubliette literally means to forget. So your sentence isn't even to life. It's to until the guards get bored, the jailer loses interest, or some malicious monk recalls your existence during a particularly slow sermon. They didn't bother with meals because, why waste food on someone who's essentially dead to society? If you think solitary confinement is hell, try it without a book, a mattress, or even a glimmer of light. It's like being dropped into an underground studio apartment where the decor is enforced misery and the roommate is death's shadow, forever unpaid rent collector. Still chained, still not dead. But wait, there's more. Medieval prisoners weren't just starved and left in the dark. They were left to wrestle with rats just to keep company. Your feisty companions included vermin that feasted on mud, not gourmet cheese. Yet somehow they had better survival odds than you did. Imagine swiping at squirrels with a toothpick and losing. Oh, and the stench. Picture rotten eggs marinating in old sock juice while you try not to gag. Unsurprisingly, diseases ran wild: dysentery, scurvy, gangrene, turning your slow death into a gross biology lesson. And let's not forget the psychological torture. No conversations, no sunlight, no horizon, just you and your echo circling each other like worn-out prisoners in a cage match with sanity. Your own breath is your loudest companion. No wonder half the prisoners didn't last a week. You could count your days by the collapse of your own hope, not by any calendar. If you're lucky enough to perish, your decomposing corpse might be discovered months later, an unintended archaeological exhibit of neglect and bad decisions. Think you could last longer than the average modern couch potato binge-watching Netflix? Spoiler, not a chance. Your sentence is simple until someone remembers you exist. Spoiler alert, that never happens. So sleep tight, prisoner, you're on hold with death, and the line's been disconnected in a medieval way. Congratulations, you've just volunteered to be medieval dungeon decor. Population: you, the mold, and a rat so bold it uses your eyeball as a chew toy. Life expectancy back then? Roughly 30 years. Which means, surprise, if you landed behind those stone walls, Your odds looked worse than a dial-up internet connection in a blackout. No Wi-Fi, no pizza delivery, no doctor who isn't basically a drunk barber wielding a rusty saw. Now imagine you're tossed in a cell. It's damp, the kind of damp that makes your clothes curl up and your hopes curl down. No food, no light, no silence, because somewhere in the distance some poor soul's screaming, probably begging for a mercy that smells like vinegar and failure. Medieval prisons weren't built for your comfort. They were punishment theaters where hygiene was a myth and diseases part of the curriculum. Typhus? Plague? Oh, those are just your unofficial roommates. The medical wisdom of the time? If the bleeding stops, you're probably fine. Spoiler, you're not. And then there's the air. You think modern apartments are stuffy? Try breathing centuries-old dungeon air, an amalgam of damp stone, human despair, and whatever that smell is behind the chamber pot. You'd have a better shot surviving in a New York subway at rush hour where, at least, you can legally complain. And if you think a prison rat's bad company, consider fleas, lice, and other creep-crawlies invited to the party, feasting like it's their last supper. They're the medieval equivalent of your personal Zika virus. But wait, did you know the average knight's supposed paragon of health rarely made it past their 40s? That's right. Your medieval peers dropped dead younger than a smartphone battery with 20 apps running. Infant mortality was a beast of its own. Nearly half of all children never made it to double digits. Oh, and childbirth? A leading cause of death for women. So living to 30 was more like hitting the jackpot, not a ticket to a golden retirement. And you? You're sitting in a pitch-black cell, rotting like last week's turnip, hoping rats don't start a party on your leg. Still chained. Still not dead. Half the prisoners died in a week. You're on day 6. Still cold. Still chained. Still not dead. So here you are, conveniently forgotten by time, notable only as a cautionary expense for your lord. Surrounded by stories of kings and conquests, but your story? Just a footnote in the stench-filled footnotes of history. And guess what? In the grand scheme, you're the lucky one. Keep that in mind next time you twitch at your office cubicle, because the only escape from a medieval dungeon was not escaping at all. It was dying first and fast enough to miss Monday. You think a weekend in a crowded subway is rough? Try a medieval dungeon. These charming establishments averaged 0 sunlight, 0 hygiene, and a daily menu of moldy bread so stale even a rat wouldn't touch it. Oh, and guess what? Your cell probably had more moisture than a rainforest, thanks to dripping stone walls and whatever bathroom meant back then. A blessing if you're into swimming with your own filth. Bonus points if you like the aroma of mildew mixed with human excrement, a true medieval eau de toilette. Still chained, still cold, still not dead. Funny, right? Except death was only a matter of time, because medieval prisons weren't about justice, they were public storage units for human misery. They expected about 50 of inmates to keel over within a month, not because of execution, but because the walls themselves were dining on your sanity and flesh. Spoiler alert, the iron shackles didn't cut off blood flow gently. They left marks that outlived your hope, becoming grotesque trophies of your suffering. You think pest problems in your office are bad? Try sharing your cell with rats so fat they smelled like someone left their gym locker unlocked for a century. Rats weren't just guests, they were roommates. According to some grim medieval scribbler, rats did more damage to prisoners than the jailers ever dreamed. Ever tried to swat away a rat while chained to a cold wall? No? Thought so. If a rat bit off your ear, well, that just made you part of the decoration. And the lighting. Oh, the lighting. To them, dim meant a single guttering candle that flickered out faster than your optimism. No screens, no Spotify, not even a crumpled magazine. Just endless darkness so thick it gave nightmares a place to hang out and smoke cigarettes. You'd think at least the silence would be a comfort? Wrong. It was a cacophony of damp misery, metal scraping stone, and your own brain's slow descent into madness. Really, who needs Netflix when you've got psychotic breaks and hallucinations free of charge? By the way, the truly medieval amazing part prisoners were sometimes chained in full view of the public, like some grotesque social media post announcing your failure. Privacy was a myth dignity, a joke you were not just caged, but exhibited like a warning sign to everyone else who dared cross the wrong lord. VIP treatment. Got a visitor? Hope they brought a bucket water wasn't exactly on tap. Still chained. Still cold. Still not dead and likely wishing you were just to shut up the rats. Because hey, if you think your office is hell, welcome to the original escape room, where even death didn't come on time. No cheat codes, no pause button, just raw human despair served stale daily. Congratulations, you've won the main prize, survival in a horror show nobody really wanted front row seats to. You think you've got a rough Tuesday? Try being tossed into a medieval dungeon, less a room, more a tomb, with worse plumbing. They like to call it justice, but really it was just the world's slowest death sentence. No food, no light, no silence. Just fleas deciding if you were a mattress or a midnight snack. By day 7, rats had more friends than you. Spoiler. They never invite you to dinner. Oh, you want a mattress? How about a cold stone slab smeared with last guy's accidents? Comfort was for nobles and birds, and the birds got to fly out, not rot in a pit. The air? Thick enough to drown in. You'd choke on your own breath before you sank into dreams. Still chained, still not dead. The dungeon's master, said Chaucer, was a cruel guard who knew no pity. Translation: your welcome committee never smiled, never blinked, never forgot you were there. Hygiene? Forget it. Modern-day jail might claim Spartan standards, but medieval dungeons were where germs went to hobnob and multiply like it was a rave. You think a cough in an office is bad? Imagine every cough spit and festering sore compressed into a 6-foot by 6-foot hole with no escape and no aspirin. They didn't do health codes because they didn't do survival codes. The stench alone would curl your nostrils into a permanent scowl. And that one filthy bucket you called a toilet? It was either overflowing or frozen solid. Surprise, surprise, dysentery didn't check the guest list. And guess what? You might think death takes a polite sip and fades away. Nope. Medieval dungeons special ordered slow kills, starvation, dehydration, despair, or the occasional bonus torture. Because why just let you die when they could have the excruciating fun of making sure you regret every breath? A practice so grim, even Game of Thrones only flirts with it. Some poor souls never made it past week 2. Their screams muffled by stone, and by then the guards barely noticed. Hope? Optional. Sanity? Optional. Escape? Don't kid yourself. Still want to romanticize the Dark Ages? Keep dreaming while you sleep on a bed of bugs, spiraling into madness without so much as a drink of water or a clean shirt. That's your new hotel experience. Concierge? A guard with a rusty chain, barely changing shifts and twice as indifferent. Your only company, shadows and the echo of dripping slime. Light from a torch flickered or didn't. If you were lucky, a rat might nibble a finger to remind you that pain was still real. Surviving this? Let's not lie to ourselves. You'd be dead before your Spotify playlist finished buffering, if it even loaded underground. Don't worry, the rats'll miss you. Or maybe they won't. One thing's for sure, the dungeon doesn't care. It just waits patient and unbothered for the next guest to slip through its rotten gates. Good luck with your bad Tuesday. You think being locked in a modern prison cell is rough? Medieval dungeons would make your Airbnb complaints sound like a bedtime story. Imagine a hole in the ground so dark even your nightmares file for unemployment. No mattress, no blanket, no hygiene. A 14th century English chronicler bragged about the stink and the worms as if they were perks. You'd last about as long as a fruit fly in a bug zapper. No heat, no clean water, no light. And the only visitors? Rats with better manners than the guards. They even built dungeons under castles because the stink of decomposing bodies didn't interfere with the noble cuddliness upstairs. Imagine that your last view is a rat nibbling on your hand while royalty dines 3 floors up discussing fashion trends. Still chained, still not dead. You'd think diet might save you. Nope. Spoiled bread soaked in stagnant water is the 5-star meal here. The food was so bad it's a wonder they didn't issue cyanide capsules as a mercy. Even modern prison food, which, yes, is famously soul-crushing, wins a Michelin star by comparison. Ever heard of Wheals fungal infections caused by damp clothing crawling endlessly over your skin? You'll become a walking, scratching pincushion while the dungeon's ambiance drives you mad. Funny enough, torture devices doubled as furniture. The rack was both a popular gaming table and a way to stretch your limbs into Picasso territory. You're not just a prisoner, you're a piece of decor. And all for what? Some medieval lord's vacation home dungeon fantasy. Let's lock 'em up and see who breaks first. Spoiler, it wasn't the dungeon. To add insult to injury, dungeons weren't just about punishment, they were tools of psychological warfare. The constant dripping of water, the echo of distant screams, the total sensory deprivation, all engineered to break your will long before the shackles did the rest. And if you got lucky, you might catch a glimpse of light during a rare inspection, where the guards tossed you scraps like you were a stray dog they'd forgotten to walk. So here you are trapped in this oubliette, scraping life from the slimy floor, wondering if Snapchat could send an SOS from hell. Meanwhile, the medieval state hasn't even bothered to invent soap. Remember, at least in modern prisons, you get a rope to hang yourself. Medieval dungeons? You were the rope. But hey, look, on the bright side, a 5-star resort might not have rats, blood, or despair. They might even give you Wi-Fi, unless you're into medieval nostalgia, in which case enjoy that viper's nest. It's your new luxury suite. You think you'd get a fair shake at trial? Cute. Over 90 of accused medieval prisoners rotted away in the dank before anyone even bothered to ask what they did. Spoiler, you wouldn't last that long. Welcome to the dungeon, where hope goes to die faster than a snowflake in hell. No trial, no lawyers, no bail. Just a stone box with a puddle you can't avoid, and an array of rats who definitely want a bite of you before your inevitable "he died mysteriously" paperwork. And don't fool yourself, this wasn't a glitch or an oversight. It was business as usual. Torture was the whole legal system wrapped up in a very unappealing, rusty bow. Confession or death wasn't just a slogan, it was the sales pitch. Oh, you thought medieval justice sounded grimly poetic? Nah, it was just lazy. Food was a rumor like justice itself. Prisoners starved or maybe got that daily ration of inode-mashing gruel that qualifies as nutrition if you squint really hard. No light, no ventilation, no hygiene. If you complain about your Wi-Fi at home being slow, remember these folks had 0 signal, 0 hope, and a robust colony of fleas that considered them 5-star accommodations. Still chained, still not dead. How are you feeling? Hungry? Tired? Desperate? Excellent. Now imagine that for months, years, sometimes until someone forgot you existed. Here's the jewel. A famous medieval chronicler, Jean Froissart, noted prisoners sometimes vanished quietly, which is aristocratic. Speak for, died alone, nobody cared. The monarchy cared only so much. The longer you lived, the more. You drained their resources. Imagine a subscription service that auto-canceled you via neglect. Netflix has nothing on medieval prisons, at least their buffering is brief. Here, buffering was inevitable death. And get this, sometimes your transfer to a new dungeon meant a slower death by exposure or being thrown into the pit with the most aggressive vermin. There was no paperwork for mercy, no appeals hotline. If you screamed, no one answered. The guards, mostly bored, underpaid sadists who considered your suffering their favorite pastime. A sick lottery where your cellmate might be a thief, a rival noble, or someone who'd decide you make a nice chew toy. So no, you don't get trial. You don't get a farewell speech. You get the dungeon diet, which is exactly like being ghosted, but with more blood and less closure. And if you somehow outlive your sentence, congratulations, you're either a miracle or a legendary corpse nobody wanted to acknowledge. Cheers to that. Think you'd last a week in a medieval dungeon? Cute. Odds are you'd be dead or screaming into the void within 3 days. The average cell? Cold stone walls, a puddle of who knows what, and just enough space to remind you you're utterly trapped. Oh, and the bed? A rat-infested slab harder than your last breakup. Fun, right? According to some cheerful chronicler, prisoners literally survived on bread so stale it could double as a weapon. Protein? Good luck. Spoiler alert, your modern hangry is basically medieval PTSD. No food, no light, no silence. Just you, your chains, and what your captors hoped was either your surrender or your mind snapping. Medieval dungeons weren't strict. They were designed to erode the very concept of hope. It's not an accident that cells were meant to be forgotten like your last failed relationship status on social media. The air was so rank even the rats packed up and left except for the ones that served as your unwelcome sleepover guests. Fresh air? That's a luxury in a spa, not a prison. Ventilation was. Because who needed oxygen when you had despair? You'd think shackles, those clunky, rusting fashion statements were just for flair. Nope, they crushed ankles, shredded flesh, and ensured you couldn't make any regrettable escape attempts. Chains plus rags, the original dungeon chic. You'd look like a zombie thrift shop mannequin, but smell like a compost heap. And hygiene? Medieval imagination stopped at water causes illnesses, so bathing was basically mythological. Showers took the form of medieval torture devices, not refreshing rituals. People these days bitch about air conditioning tree stank that could knock out a horse. Here's a gem. To be shut in a dungeon was more to be dead than alive, wrote one medieval warden, clearly understating a fact. You're trapped in 50 square feet of misery surrounded by stone-cold reminders that someone else holds your fate and your freedom isn't coming back. Rats chewing your clothes, fleas crawling up your skin, and the endless drip of dampness that seeps into your bones meant your dungeon outfit wasn't exactly runway ready. Your cloak might as well have been rotting burlap. Spoiler fabric didn't just chill. You'd grew mold bugs and an odor so historic it should have its own Wikipedia page. Forget any modern survival hacks. No protein shakes, no pep talks, just stale crumbs and the constant soundtrack of your own regret bouncing off stone walls. Half the prisoners died in a week. You're on day 6. Still cold, still chained, still not dead but barely. Welcome to your permanent glow-up failure. Congrats. You're now officially a ghost story. Trapped in a dungeon so dank even rats have unionized and quit showing up. No food, no light, no silence. Just you and the off-brand medieval mold that smells like despair and regret. And don't even think about hygiene. Your last bath was a century ago in the Great Plague of 1347. And guess what? Soap hadn't been invented yet. That stuff was considered witchcraft anyway, so good luck convincing your captors to spare you a scrub. They'll chain you to a wall like you're some VIP guest, except your accommodations are a shallow pit with the moisture of a soggy grave and the temperature of a Midwestern freezer in January. Medieval prisons had about as much chance of survival as a smartphone dropped into a vat of battery acid. You're basically the world's slowest game over screen. Still chained, still cold, still not dead. And every day smells like a mix of stale sweat, rotting straw, and pure, unfiltered hopelessness. Here's a fun fact. According to medieval wisdom, prisoners were often left to fatten up for their execution. Translations starve you just enough to keep you breathing, but not enough to escape clinging to life like a bad rash. Feasts? Nope. Your diet consists of stale bread, occasionally watered down with whatever they can piss in. You think your office coffee is rough? Try Dungeon Brew, guaranteed to make you question if a cup of mud might be an upgrade. In fact, many prisoners ended up so malnourished, their teeth fell out before the axe hit. Bonus, right? And don't kid yourself, cells were pitch black, no light, just the sinister tick-tock of your heartbeat becoming the dungeon soundtrack. No clocks, no entertainment. Only the echo of dripping water mocking your eternal weight, and the scurry of unseen vermin plotting their own escape. Phones have better signal underground than you'll ever get here. If you manage to whisper a prayer, even the walls don't bother to listen. But hey, at least you're not being torturito. Wait, yes you are. Because medieval cruelty didn't just do basic discomfort. It was a full contact sport complete with spikes, irons, and enough creative torment to make a modern haunted house blush. Thumb screws, iron maidens, you name it. They probably thought it up, all designed to break your spirit slowly while amusing whoever pulled the strings. And when they finally decided your time was up, most victims didn't die quickly. They lingered half-dead performances in the horror show of medieval justice, sometimes taking days or weeks to shuffle off this mortal coil. So, as you rot here blinking at a hole barely big enough to imagine freedom through, remember you missed the Renaissance. You missed soap. You missed empathy. You are the ghost-rattling chains that were never meant to hold anything but the past, and no one's coming to save you except maybe the rats or the mold. Either way, cheers to your eternal festering residency. Prison Life Medieval Edition budget accommodations for the afterlife, no refunds. You'd last about as long in a medieval dungeon as your phone battery does after 2 hours of doom scrolling, except worse, because your phone doesn't stink like rotten straw and sweat-soaked rats. No food, no light, no silence. Just the kind of darkness that seeps into your soul, and the kind of smells that make a landfill feel like a spa day. According to some charming medieval torture manual, it was considered totally fine to throw prisoners in holes underground until they lost their minds, which is, historian, speak for, we watched you slowly become a sad twitching mess, while time happily crumbled you to dust. Think you'd tough it out? Spoiler, you wouldn't. In the 14th century, the average dungeon cell was so cramped, damp, and cold, the only companion less comforting than the moldy walls was the constant drip-drip of water that promised you'd catch pneumonia before you figured out who you really were. And no, you don't get a blanket or even a crust of bread. The worst part? Guards would toss you scraps infested with maggots because obviously feeding prisoners gourmet wasn't a thing back then. It's like trying to survive off expired airport vending machine snacks except with more blood and less Wi-Fi. Oh, and those scraps often arrive through slots barely big enough to slide food and leaving you desperate to grab even a single crumb before the rats claim the rest for their midnight feast. You think modern prisons are bad? Try being locked in a pit where your only exercise is shuffling in your own filth while rats conduct a symphony on your ribs. Geoffrey Chaucer once claimed that dungeons break more than bones, but you'd be lucky if the rot of the place didn't break your will first. Rats gnaw at anything within reach, wooden beams rotting to dust your clothes, even your sanity. The cold seeps in through cracks so small you swear the chill is a living thing crawling beneath your skin. Freedom wasn't just a door you couldn't open, it was a fantasy your mind desperately clawed at, while your body slowly betrayed you like a phone glitching out in airplane mode, still chained, still not dead. Just you, the cold stone, and the absurd idea that enduring this was historically called justice. Sometimes the only light was the flicker of a torch held long enough to remind you day still existed somewhere far above your personal hell. So next time you complain about slow internet, remember you've already got the endurance of a medieval noble, and that's why you'd absolutely fail the dungeon survival test. No knightly courage required, just the ability to say goodbye to your sanity.